Joining us tonight is Distinguished Professor of International Law at Florida A&M University's College of Law, Dr. Jeremy Levitt. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Laverne.
Well, earlier in the week, President Trump claimed complete authority to reopen the government. New York's governor said that claim sounded more like that of a king. Does the president have that much power?
Well, it's an interesting question because the president hasn't taken any action to shut down the economy. So how could he have the authority to reopen an economy he hasn't shut down? It's the governors that, through executive orders, that have put stay-at-home or shelter-in-place policies in place. That virtually has shut down the economy state by state. The president has taken action under the National Emergencies Act, and that act gives him very broad authority to take action when there's a natural disaster or when there's a national emergency like we have now. But in this case, he hasn't taken any action that reflects the economy. So I'm not quite sure what he's referring to. Certainly, he's friendly with totalitarian leaders, but we're a democracy. And until he takes such action, he can't undo such action. So I would say that the president probably wants to, in some ways, decrease the guidelines that the nation has put forward, but those aren't legal guidelines. Those are just guidelines issued by the White House, and he's thinking that governors then will have the justification they need to begin to reopen the economy. But all the science shows and all the scientists at the CDC are saying that we're not ready for that yet. And if there's a reopening of the economy per se, meaning that businesses are allowed to open and people are allowed to move out of their shelter-in-place positions, we could very quickly see a spike in the virus again. We're not nearly on top of this. There's not enough testing available, and certainly there's no vaccine. So to do so at this point would be extremely unwise.
Well, if the states and businesses did reopen and have people go back to work, who would be held responsible if more people then got sick?
Well, I think the states where the people live and the businesses that are employing them could potentially have some liability. If businesses reopen, remember that you can't order businesses to open. You can shut them down, but you can't order them to open. So businesses take on an enormous amount of liability if people become infected, whether they're workers or whether they're customers. And certainly if states do so in a way, meaning that they withdraw the executive orders, they withdraw the shelter-in-place provisions before we're ready, there could be some liability by states to citizens and perhaps even to corporations. I think the corporations are going to look at this very carefully. It's their economic interests that are at stake, and they're probably better suited to make decisions than the governor or even the president, who really has no authority but thinks he has the authority. So we'll see. But certainly there will be liability if there are business owners that engage in practices that put the public health at risk.
So we're hearing tomorrow that there are some sort of plans to reopen. Do you think this is maybe just a set of recommendations to governors that President Trump will be offering?
Yeah, I think that after he makes these pronouncements, there are people who sit him down and pat him on his back and say, Mr. President, you're just not allowed to do this. This is not the way it works. But I think he wants to see the economy open. Remember, 2 weeks ago, he was talking about reopening the economy around Easter. Easter has passed. I think he's eager to do it. I think there are some states and some governors that want to follow suit. On the whole, it's an extremely bad idea. And here we just have to balance these two things. We have the economy on one side and we have public health on the other. And when the economy becomes more important than the health of people at a time when we have a spike in deaths, this is going to be a tragic situation if we go forward. We're not ready yet. We need to wait probably another month and reassess the scientific data.